All right, chat, we're going to watch a video from WillE that was done actually back in May. And I'd marked it as one that looked like it was really interesting to watch. And WillE is, of course, one of my favorite content providers right now. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I will be leaving the link down below. Those of you who are watching live on Twitch, I'll give you guys the link as well. Please go and subscribe to WillE's channel. He puts out some fantastic content. His videos are pretty much all very good, and I believe he's one of the top 2 or 3 top content creators for Wrath of the Lich King right now. So definitely go check him out. He made this video a little while back. I have not watched it. It's Wrath of the Lich King's most weird yet viable specs. There's a lot of them apparently. I've always been somebody that loves kind of theory crafting different specs. I've done it in plenty of different games. In one game, I came up with a strength-based priest that actually, because of the buffs that he could give himself, would hit you with like long swords really fast. It was a game called Shadowbane, and people thought it was the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard of until I started killing people with it, and it was actually funny. But anyways, that's just one example, but I'm kind of interested to see what he says. I wonder if the heal enhance shaman is on here that people are talking about. Anyways, let's check this out and see what he has to say. Again, those of you that are watching live, if you've got any comments, please feel free to say something. Mosevich, I'm doing good, man. We're just going to watch a video here. If you have any comments, just comment in the chat if you want, and I'll be stopping the video from time to time and give my thoughts on some of these specs that he's talking about to see whether I think they're viable or not. Anyways, before the video even starts, I think, honestly, guilds are just going to min-max, and, like, people are going to be like, oh, heal enhance shaman is kind of a meme. Yeah, maybe you can do that during 5-mans or something like that, but I don't know that, I don't know that it's going to take off in rating, but we'll see what kind of specs he's got here.
Talent trees and spell combos did one thing right. It was allowing creativity, flexibility, and just for plain fun to happen. Sure, back then your class still had the cookie cutter, everybody knows this talent build is good and it works, but there were also so many other variations. Ideas where players took advantage of creative use of game mechanics to make their own specs that fit a niche, opened a new playstyle, or proved that a certain class or spec had more to it than meets the eye. In vanilla we had things like the tank shaman, the spell power hunter, the smite priest. Moving into TBC, there was the notorious...
Hold on, let me go through this again. The tank shaman. Okay.
Proof that was a certain class or spec had more to it than meets the eye. In vanilla, we had things like the tank shaman, the spell power hunter, the smite priest. Moving into TBC.
I mean, those are memes. You're not bringing a smite priest. I mean, these are... They're most weird yet viable. I don't know that those are viable specs.
There was the notorious rise of the Shockadin. These specs, while still unique in the way they played, well...
I think he's talking about an original, like, vanilla and TBC, right? Shockadin's funny as hell. Like, again, like, you're not bringing it to a raid, but it is actually pretty fun to actually PvP with the Shockadin. It's pretty funny.
They weren't very good. Sure, they were different, but kind of for the sake of being different. The Wrath talent trees were the biggest they have ever been, on top of so many extra impactful abilities being added to the game. Wrath of the Lich King saw by far the most weird specs pop up, and they weren't even meme specs either. Sometimes these new player creations were so powerful they had to be nerfed, and in many cases they were. Now, whilst Wrath Classic will be on 3.3.5 patch balancing, so we won't see the majority of these specs in action again, I thought it would be a fun trip down memory lane, or just to show you how things used to be during expansion, and to take a look at some of Wrath the Lich King's weird yet viable specs.
Specs that
I want to start
used
off with
to be able to
something
have.
that got nerfed pretty fast before it got nerfed again and again until it was completely unviable. This is the Hat Rogue. So there was this really OP helm you got from a quest, and you know what, I'm just going to stop that there. That's a terrible joke. So Hat stands for Honor Amongst Thieves. This was a new rogue talent down in the subtlety tree. When anyone in your party crits, you gain 1 combo point on your current target. Already sounds pretty powerful, to be honest. And when Wrath first launched, it was bugged. Players quickly found this and the rise of the Hat Rogue began. So what was the bug? Well, with 2 rogues in the party that both had Honor Among Thieves, if either of them crit, both gained 2 combo points. With 3 rogues, any 3 of them crit with any non-auto attack, all 3 gain 3 combo points. And yes, 5 rogues
We have
with
2
that
rogues in
meant
our raid, by the
anybody
way.
critting was instant 5 combo points. You could, with no exaggeration, have a party of 5 rogues literally just spamming Eviscerate for an entire fight. And if any Eviscerate crit, everybody gets 5 combo points back. It was completely insane. Blizzard caught onto this fairly fast and deployed a fix for this talent that was clearly being used in an unintended way. But all they did was make it so it didn't stack between rogues anymore. It was still the case that if anybody crits ever, you get a combo point. And you know, hunters and warlocks, yeah, their pets count for this as well. With a rogue and 4 hunters in a party, you could, theoretically, get 8 combo points per global whilst only spamming finishing moves. Imagine that with a Hysteria on top. Later on, Blizzard decided, you know what, let's buff this talent actually and let periodic effects add combo points too. Though finally in patch 3.2.2, this spec lasted into Ulduar somehow, Blizzard finally decided enough was enough and limited combo point generation to 1 combo point per second from party members. This effectively instantly killed the spec overnight. Rogues already had to go deep into the subtree to get this talent, they were taking a lot of poor PvE choices just for this broken one, and so this would be the end of the Honor Amongst Thieves rogue. The viability in PvE did last for some time and allowed a unique rogue playstyle, but it was just a bit too degenerate. I wonder how this spec would have fared with late game levels of armor pen though. But I can remember another prominent rogue spec which caused problems, and this one was in PvP and related to one of Rogue's new spells, Fan of Knives. Swan Release Fan was it was pretty bad to be honest. You needed a target and it had quite a long cooldown. An early patch saw huge buffs to get people excited about this new rogue ability, completely removing its cooldown and giving it bonus damage whilst having a dagger equipped. You could also glyph Fan for even more damage. Now
That's
surely
ridiculous.
when doing this, Blizzard didn't forget about a talent which would have been completely broken if Fan had its cooldown removed. Oh wait, they did. Throwing specialization. This was quite far down into the combat tree, which wasn't really designed for PvP to be honest. The old version of throwing specialization affected
Look
Fan
at
of
this.
Knives
What
as
is there,
well.
5
Despite
rogues
me
there?
not being able to find it anywhere online, I'm pretty sure it used to silence as well.
That's
This iteration of the
hilarious.
spell just lasted for a very short amount of time because it was
Hold
so
on.
clearly
That is insane. Is there 5 of them
really
there?
designed for PvP to be honest. The old version of throwing
There are. Check this out, chat. Look at this.
specialization affected Fan of Knives as well, and despite me not being able to find it anywhere online, I'm pretty sure it used to silence as well. This iteration of the spell just lasted for a very short amount of time because it was so clearly overpowered. As in, it would have been a spammable
What some
AoE
rogues are doing in
3-second
Wrath? Not
silence.
really.
Can't
Well,
see
what
any
are they
problems
doing?
with that. Yep. Put it straight into Arena. At least silencers
Rogues
are
are
now
very
on
good in
diminishing
Wrath.
returns in Wrath. That's a small saving grace here. So Blizzard got rid of its silencing, but left it interrupting spellcasts for a very long time. In early Wrath, rogues had a spammable, high damage, applied poisons, AoE, interrupt. It was already hard enough to cast a spell against a rogue, and now they have this as well. Still, the spec was a little bit more memey. It did good damage with its cooldowns and killing spree, but after that they could not compare to the utility of the subtlety rogue. Eventually in 3.22, Fan of Knives got hit with a big damage nerf and was removed from throwing specialization so it no longer interrupted, essentially ending.
You know what? One thing about rogues is I honestly believe they are probably one of, if not the highest skill cap classes in the game. Like, there are people that can play a rogue all right and get by and be an okay rogue. But the difference between like an average or even a really good rogue and a really, really good rogue is it's really, I honestly think it's one of the highest skill cap classes in the game.
This spec in
For PvP and PvP for sure.
PvP. Next up, the Spell Hance Shaman. This is a spec that you should expect to see experimentation during round.
You've seen this on beta, the Spell Hance Shaman, and they're doing sick damage. And now they've come out with a heal enhanced shaman as well, which I believe Rugs has a video on. And where it's basically a heal version of this where I'm not exactly sure how it works, but basically like every time you like crit or something like that, yeah, heal enhance. So you're basically meleeing, and whenever you get a proc, you're able to get like a chain heal cast off or something like that. And he was showing it like he was healing in a 5-man raid or instance and stuff like that. And I think he's joking that he is going to use it in a raid. He's probably not, but like it would just be a joke. And people in his guild were like, "Oh my god, dude, it's not gonna work."
Classic.
Like, watch Jordy talk about it. He's like, "Oh no, 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 no."
And is one of the few specs we're going to go over today that has evolved over time on fan servers. Enhance already has built-in spell scaling through the mental quickness talent, and this variation of Enhance aims to build on that, taking on a much more hybridized idea of dealing damage, using spell damage weapons, rings, necks, and trinkets, and trying to stack a lot more spell power than your traditional...
I'm not gonna lie, the spell hands and heal enhance shamans, like, spec sounds like a blast. Like, it honestly sounds so fun. And like I'm one of those people that just doesn't stop leveling characters, but this heal enhance would probably be useless as F in a raid, but it's almost tempting to level just as kind of a meme. I don't know.
Enhancement work.
I'm going to assume that they can't do much damage, but apparently these spell hand shamans, like towards the beginning of Wrath, I don't know how they scale in gear, but towards the beginning of Wrath, they are doing an insane amount of damage. So they're like top tier, like DPS basically.
They also spec down into Elemental and getting glyphs for things like Fire Nova and Flame Tongue. You're not relying on Wind Fury for your main source of damage anymore. Instead, Flame Tongue should be much higher up there. You do a lot of fire damage and you have a
The problem with this spell hand shaman though is I don't believe it really brings anything to a raid. If you've got a resto shaman, the spell hand shaman's not really bringing anything extra to the raid that you like buff wise. So
really great AoE through the reworked Fire Nova, and it should in some cases beat out the traditional enhancement playstyle. Also, don't forget elemental damage bypasses armor by default, and Enhance is already in a good spot in early raids. There are definitely questions to be asked here whether the fan servers have got it right when it comes to this class, as in the scaling, what abilities should stack, what should proc off each other, and so on. Simply put, there could very well be a full-on viable alternate way to play enhancement, or there might not. People will explore it during the beta, and at that point we will only know for sure. So if you're an enhancement player, keep your eyes open. And now we get on to the Paladin part of the video. Suffice to say, Paladins in Wrath were very OP and had no shortage of busted specs. The first one I want to cover is Prot Holy Paladin. This was used in PvP. One of their new talents was Touched by the Light, which on the final patch balancing, as you can see here,
spell power by an equal amount to 60% of your strength, increase the amount healed by your critical. Jesus.
Turns strength into spell damage. This is so Prot scales as a PvE tank, but it didn't used to work like this. It used to turn stamina into spell power, 30% of your stamina,
oh my God.
as well as increasing your critical heals by 30% of your stamina. And Holy Gear for PvP,
stamina.
Wouldn't you know it, had stamina on, a lot of stamina. What if we also were to fully gem stamina and equip trinkets with stamina, and take all the many Paladin talents that give you a percentage extra stamina? You end up with a class with a ridiculous amount of health and spell power. And remember, no spell damage or healing in Wrath, it's all spell power, which does both. A Prot Holy spec would look something like this. These are last patch talents, I couldn't find earlier ones, but it's just to give you an idea. This was literally a tank spec that if they ever landed a heal, would nearly go back to full health, and if they ever crit with Flash of Light, it was like a lay on hands. Through these talents, silences, interrupts, and stuns duration are reduced by 30%. You add Aura Mastery to fully immune all interrupts and silences for 6 seconds, a cheat death through Ardent Defender, a 30-second cooldown on Hammer of Justice, which is a 6-second stun,
overpowered.
a 3-second silence on Avenger Shield, again 30-second cooldown. Don't forget about Sacred Shield either, that provided massive absorbs and pretty much guaranteed a Flash of Light crit. The main weakness, well, as you can see, they have nothing which is instant cast, but they have a ton of utility, and they existed at the same time as the Fan of Knives spam rogues, meaning they were susceptible to getting trained down, but one heal and it's a full boss reset on the Prot Holy Paladin. Either way, Touched by the Light was the real backbone of this spec, and when that got changed from stamina to strength in 3.22, this kind of stopped being a thing. But that did not stop people from playing Prot in PvP. Nope, they just went from healers to damage dealers. There isn't really too much to add on to what's already been said for how good Paladin is. Again, a 30-second cooldown on their big go between a 6-second stun and a 3-second silence.
I'm not, like, honestly, like, I have never thought about playing Paladin, but a Prot, like, if you're Prot spec and you can actually do decent damage, that's, like, that's sick, actually. That's almost tempting.
You could also glyph Avenger's shields for 100% more damage and it only being single target, which actually made their burst very powerful as well. You won't see Prot Holy in arenas I don't think, but you will see Prot now and again. And you know what? Neither of these were even the most OP Pala spec in PvP. There's been Prot Holy, there's been just Prot, and of course there's still Ret and Holy, which players you would expect them to. But what if? What if we have a Paladin spec which does everything? A Prot, Holy, Ret build. Well, you know what? It exists, and it will be
No, what?
a viable playstyle in Wrath Classic. This is a fan server creation which is known as the Preg Pala, named after the player who popularized the idea. This Paladin spec kind of covers all three roles in one. You deal damage through Shield of the Righteous and Judgment, you take tanking talents for extra utility, your off heals are very powerful through Art of War and Sheath of Light. With a fast weapon and Reckoning, you can proc an instant cast Flash of Light which heals a lot, and probably crits if you have Sacred Shield up, quite literally every single global. And yes, you deal damage with a one hand and a shield instead of a two hand, and it's a Paladin after all, so yeah, it still does damage. You have strong setup with Hodge and Repentance and are hard to kill because, well, because you're a semi-tank. It does need some gear to really get going, however, especially a good weapon, but fully expect to see people playing this in Wrath Arena. It's an absolute nightmare spec to face and is a similar feeling to seeing the arena gates open in
Oh my god, this is actually... I shouldn't be watching this stuff. Honestly, I shouldn't be watching this stuff because now I'm sitting there going, that looks like a blast to play. Do we level a Paladin next just to play this in like a in
DBC
BGs?
and facing a hunter with two healers. Okay, that's about enough about Paladin for now. Next up, some DK goodness. You better believe there was so many different, viable, and equally overpowered Death Knight
You know what the thing that people forget about DKs? When they first brought DKs out, Blizzard had intended that all three specs were going to be viable tanks.
Back in the day. I want to do a full breakdown on the DK from launch to final patch soon. Anyways, the Shadow Frost Death Knight was
It's
a
too hard to
PvP
balance.
build that is probably the closest we've
Yeah,
ever
they were
gotten
broken.
to a proper Necromancer class in WoW. So Death Knights in early Wrath could pretty much throw their talent points wherever they wanted, and they were overpowered. This spec focused on turning the new
Throw your
melee
talent
class
points
into
wherever
a
you wanted,
caster.
and
they dealt
just
their
sit
damage
there and
mainly through
face
Icy
roll.
Touch and Death Coil. An old Icy Touch glyph would make it generate loads of runic power, and when DKs finally closed the gap, their melee damage was just way overtuned. Oh, and they also had the old version of Plague Strike, which early on just straight up removed a heal over time effect. Yeah, that seems fine, doesn't it? Death Knight's Interrupt was also not melee range, and Icy Touch and Death Coil, when talented, were 25-yard range. So your effective damage range...
Man, I'm sitting here thinking about that Paladin still. Like, I need a farming character. That Paladin sounds like it might be what fixes my problem here. That Paladin Prot Holy Ret spec? Like, that sounds disgusting. And with dual spec, I can easily just respec and go farm gold with it and stuff.
For a melee was it wasn't melee. I'm going to show some example talents here as well. There is so much flexibility on how far you wanted to go down both the Frost and Unholy trees, but some key talents here were Black Ice, Chill of the Grave, and Rime in the Frost
I'm gonna
tree,
be honest,
and in
DKs I know
Unholy,
like very little
Impurity,
about.
and Unholy Blight.
Never really tried
All of
playing
these
one.
things would really ramp up your spell damage, and making your
They look
diseases
fun as hell, though.
undispellable was also absolutely pivotal to the spec. Personally, I'd consider going down the Frost tree.
Aren't druids farming machines? I think they're only farming machines for like for herbs and stuff like that. You know what's actually better than a druid for farming herbs and mining? A paladin. Paladins are actually better at it because they've got the speed buff. But I'm talking about like farming dungeons and also then using the second spec in order to play this Ret Holy Prot build or whatever he's talking about.
Enough to pick up Hunger and Cold, which is a 1-minute AoE CC, very good for setup. Shadow Frost overall was more for fun though, and you lack the survivability that Unholy could offer. Playstyle wise, it was really simple. Keep those runes on cooldown, spam Icy Touch when you have runes, and when you have runic power, spam Death Coil. Very simple, very effective. That was Death Knights early on. Another DK spec then. I feel people aren't gonna like hearing Blood is in a video about sort of meme specs, but early on in Wrath the Lich King, it was 100% a legitimate DPS spec. I know that for certain. I played one. It's not nearly as good on 3.3.5, unfortunately. It's been turned into a tank oriented.
And you know what? In Kata, blood DKs are disgusting to face in PvP. Like, you can't kill them. They're absolutely like beastly to face.
Spec, whilst Frost and Unholy are there for the DPS. So what makes it work early on but not later? Well, it's kind of the same thing as every single other weird and wild DK spec out there. They were just really overpowered. They could do anything they wanted. Here's the kind of spec you might consider, and the original dancing rune weapon was absolutely nuts. Early on, it would copy everything the DK
Paladin
did,
spec sounds
even
fun
Army
though,
of
man.
the Dead. It lasted for much longer and
Sounds
did a
fun.
huge portion of your damage, and as you can see in the patch note here, it was hit by a lot of nerfs early on. Imagine this version of dancing rune weapon with a Hysteria on top. This gave the Blood DK
Blood
DPS
DK
an
flag
incredibly
carrier, yeah.
potent opener with cooldowns. They also auto-cleave through Heart Strike, and Death Strike could scale with their runic power.
I vaguely remember times where you'd have like 2 or 3 people just unloading on a Blood DK and they would like just heal through it. Basically, it was just disgusting.
Through a glyph. This spec was also more or less entirely physical damage focused, which despite low armor pen values early, it was still competitive due to how short fights were and the power of its cleave and burst setup. Blood DPS is kind of a thing, I guess, if you really want it to be, but in patch 3.2 and beyond, we can see how Blizzard have begun to shift its direction, but the tier set of Blood is only really benefiting tanking. I've no doubt people will try it all the same in Wrath Classic and will have some fun with it, but don't expect anything too crazy from Blood on final patch balancing. Next up, the Warlock. They've always
do I level? I can't get this Paladin out of my mind.
This strange side
Warlock.
class
Okay, here we
fantasy
go.
of being
Here
a
we
tank, so I feel as though I need to include it here. Back in vanilla,
Warlock
we had
tank?
AQ40 and Twin Emperors. In TBC, we have Leotharis the
Twin
Blind
Emperors.
and Illidan, assuming you actually see the demon face, that is. Wrath of the Lich King
the Illidan fight that we first week that we killed it, I tanked Illidan.
Introduced an iconic talent
when he was in shadow form or whatever.
Metamorphosis that functionally turned your Warlock into a real tank for 30 seconds. Not just a caster boss tank, a class that could tank melee as well. It had a charge, a taunt, immolation aura, and a cleave. The main problem with the identity of Warlock tanking was, well, you need a tank to be a tank for the whole fight. Not for 30 seconds every 3 minutes. Though on the Blood Council fight in ICC, there were guilds that still used a ranged tank instead of a traditional one. It doesn't stop Demo from being an overall fantastic PvE spec, but Locks tanking and Wrath as a main tank? Nah. I can see where the idea comes from, but it just doesn't really work.
No,
what about Warriors then? Do they get anything weird and wonderful? In Classic, we remember Fury Prot Warriors, the tanks with no shields pumping as much threat as they possibly could. In TBC, things are a little more sensible and tanks are wearing shields, as design most likely intended. In Wrath the Lich King, however, for a period of time, a new tanking build was experimented with, which for a change is Arms Prot. This combined buffs to the unrelenting assault talent with improved revenge, meaning your revenge is auto-cleaving, does 80% bonus damage, and has practically no cooldown. Due to going into the arms tree, you also got plenty more damage-oriented talents, whilst combining those with prot tree things such as improved defensive stance and one-handed spec for 20% more flat damage. Basically, you're trying to get the best of both worlds here to make your prot warrior really start to do some serious damage while still being a tank. The only thing is, well, you kind of need revenge to be proccing constantly, which means you need a decent number of mobs to be hitting you, which makes it more of a dungeon-based spec for tanking, which also wants to blast on the meters. For Rage, you still really want to be deep prot, and prot is a good dungeon spec by itself anyway, but if gear allows, this might be a fun spec to try out. It should still work, or at
Warriors,
least a variation
I don't
on
think
it,
Warriors
which is
are going to be
a bit
very
better
good
than what I
in
put
Wrath.
together here. You could also PvP as a protection warrior too in Wrath of the Lich King. Unlike Paladin though, it's a lot more all-in and memey. Despite prot still having good CC through Gag Order, Concussion Blow and Shockwave, you needed to stack armor pen gear to really see the damage it could do, as well as pray for some RNG resets on sword and board. One to mess about with a bit more late game, I'd say. Finally then, the Frost Fire Mage. In Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard introduced a new mage spell, Frost Fire Bolt, which benefits from both frost and fire talents. Surprisingly, the idea from Blizzard here was to really push the idea of an elemental mage, which dipped into both of these trees, and people experimented with it a lot, with variations of the build going all the way down into fire or frost, combining talents such as ice shards and ignites. Your Frost Firebolt did 100% bonus crit and then did 40% of that damage over 4 seconds. Piercing Ice gave more flat damage, and Frost Firebolt also worked with the infamous Hot Streak talent. In the end though, it never proved more competitive than Arcane and then later Fire in PvE, or just Frost in PvP. Despite all the synergies through talents, it was always a 3-second cast and a 40-yard range, as well as just not really scaling too well compared to Fireball. Nevertheless, it was a fun theory craft. Perhaps something new will come out of it in Wrath Classic, which we've never thought of. And those are all the specs I wanted to cover today. There are actually a bunch more that I could go over, for real. Wrath has so many broken and weird specs that popped up over its duration. Those old talent trees and patch by patch class balancing really went a long way. Who knows, maybe Dragonflight will see a return to this. If you know of any other emergent specs or niche uses for spells in Wrath the Lich King, do drop them down below. I'm definitely up for doing another one of these videos. They're a lot of fun to research.
Can you guys think of any other specs that could be used? I used to, you know, another class that he didn't talk about it was Druid, actually. I remember back in the day, it didn't work very well, but there were some druids that tried to like, they tried to like give, like, they'd play with like you know, feral and restoration or whatever, and have different gear sets and stuff like that, so you could heal a little bit more than you would normally be able to. Same as like you'd see, because there's talents in all 3 of the trees that benefit one of the other 2 trees. So you'd see people like, you know, doing stuff like that with feral druids, but I don't think any of them actually became very functional in anything, even PvP. So sometimes you'd see like boomkins that had maybe more healing and stuff like that, but they could pump out a little bit of damage, stuff like that. I guess kind of more like a dream state-ish type build with some damage that people would try and play a bit of both, but you would never bring one to a raid because it would be, you're just not doing enough healing and you're not really doing any, you know, enough damage to warrant you bringing either class. So anyways, there are a lot of neat specs. I am really looking forward to seeing if the spell enhancement, and damn it, I shouldn't have watched this video. I gotta like look at this Paladin one that he was talking about again. It was right around here. Is it here?
Or there might not. People will explore it during the beta, and at that point we'll be part of the video. Suffice to say, Paladins in Wrath were very, very, very OP and had no shortage of busted specs. The first one I want to cover is Prot Holy Paladin. This was used in PvP. One of their new talents was Touched by the Light, which on the final patch balancing, as you can see here,
when it didn't
turn strength into spell damage. This is so Prot scales into spell power, 30 Holy Gem Stamina, and equipped with a King in Wrath. The last patch talents, I couldn't find earlier ones, but would nerf silences into, and if they ever crit with Flash of Light, it was like a lay on hands. Through these talents, silences, interrupts, and stuns duration are reduced by 30%. You add Aura Mastery to fully immune all interrupts and silences for 6 seconds, a cheat death through Ardent Defender, a 30-second cooldown on Hammer of Justice, which is a 6-second stun, a 3-second silence on Avenger's Shield, again 30-second cooldown, Flash of Light crit. The main weakness, well, as you can see, they have nothing which is instant cast, but they have a ton of utility, and they existed at the same time as
way
the
ahead of you, man. Way ahead of you.
Meaning they were set Paladin. Either way, Touched by the Light was the real backbone of this spec, and when that got changed from stamina to strength in 3.22, this kind of stopped being a thing. But that did not stop people from playing Prot in PvP. Nope, they just went from healers to damage dealers. There isn't really too much to add on to what's already been said for how good Paladin is. Again, a 30-second cooldown on their big go between a 6-second stun and a 3-second silence. You could also glyph Avenger's Shields for 100% more damage, and it only being single target, which actually made their burst very powerful as well. You won't see Prot Holy in arenas, I don't think, but you will see Prot now and again. And you know what? Neither of these were even the most OP Pala spec in PvP. There's been Prot Holy, there's been just Prot, and of course there's still Ret and Holy, which play as you would expect them to. But what if we have a Paladin spec which does everything? A Prot Holy Ret build. Well, you know what? It exists, and it will be a viable playstyle in Wrath Classic. This is a fan server creation which is known as the Preg Pala, named after the player who popularized the idea. This Paladin spec kind of covers all 3 roles in one. You deal damage through Shield of the Righteous and Judgment, you take tanking talents for extra utility, your off heals are very powerful through Art of War and Sheath of Light. With a fast weapon and Reckoning, you can proc an instant cast Flash of Light which heals a lot, and probably crits if you have Sacred Shield up. Quite literally, every every single global. And yes, you deal damage with a one hand and a shield instead
How
of a
much
two hand.
damage are you
And it's a
dealing with
Paladin
this
after
spec,
all, so
though?
yeah, it still does damage. You have strong setup with Hodge and Repentance and are hard to kill because, well, because you're a semi-tank. It does need some gear to really get going, however, especially a good weapon, but fully expect to see people playing this in Wrath Arena. It's an absolute nightmare spec to face and is a similar feeling to seeing the arena gates open in TBC and facing a hunter with 2 healers. Okay, that's about enough about Paladin for now. Next.
Oh, so 2 healers. All right. There's a lot of interesting specs there. I'm glad we kind of took the time to watch this video. The red holy prot one. I'm gonna have to take a look at that. How much damage do you think that's doing? He one-hander, but he's got some talent points into red. I don't believe he would have enough points to go down to Avenger and oh no, it's glyphing to make Avenger's Shield single target, so you get a little bit more burst. I'm gonna have to, that sounds interesting. I'm gonna have to take a look at that and see if that's actually like how fun that might actually be to play, because that sounds like it would be an interesting spec to actually try for battlegrounds and stuff like that, just to run around and be a real pain in the ass to deal with. So anyways, another fantastic video by WillE. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, please do me a favor, go to his channel, make sure you subscribe. If you enjoyed my commentary, you can always subscribe to my channel as well. Like the video, it really does help me out. You can come talk to me on my Twitch TV channel at twitch.tv/Alodar. I stream 6 nights a week from 9 p.m. Eastern until late. Like right now, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's really late. Anyways, great video by WillE. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the commentary. We'll be back for the next video. Take care, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.